Awesomeness is a subjective goalpost, but you know what's not subjective? These 90s movies being grossly unappreciated by critics. So settle in, disagree if you want, but don't go anywhere.
Make a move and the bunny gets it.
Critics were pretty mixed on Con Air, a 1997 Nicolas Cage feature that took to the skies for an explosion-laden spectacle. Detractors found it overly long and full of predictable plot beats that, even at 115 minutes, tremendously overstayed its welcome. 3 decades later though, Con Air is a breath of fresh air from overly digital modern blockbusters. Con Air is full of natural backdrops and oversized performances that can't help but leave an impression. Nick Cage and John Malkovich chew every inch of scenery in sight.
I said, put the bunny back in the box.
Meanwhile, Steve Buscemi plays a terrific supporting role. The various big action set pieces are also nicely rendered with lots of practical explosions that seem so tangible you can't help but lean back from the screen. Con Air is also fun in its tonally disjointed moments, like a recurring use of the hit romantic ballad How Do I Live that absolutely does not fit with the rest of the film. This tune's presence is a calculated bit of marketing meant to create a Billboard chart topper, but decades later, all of it is sort of charmingly incongruous. Do yourself a favor, ignore the detractors, and take a flight on Con Air.
Sure I will. What are you gonna do for me?
What do you think I'm gonna do? I'm gonna save the day.
1997's Event Horizon got the kind of negative critical reception you'd expect from a movie crafted by Resident Evil and Monster Hunter author Paul W.S. Anderson. Most critics did praise the film's opening sequence, but felt the rest suffered from an overdose of predictability. Roger Ebert specifically critiqued the movie for failing to live up to the intellectual potential of its central premise, which is basically interdimensional horrors unleashed on a space crew.
Oh my god. It's starting!
Still, especially compared to later generically shot Anderson movies, Event Horizon has a lot to offer, even though it undeniably leaves more on the table. For one thing, its psychological thrills centered on characters like Dr. William Weir losing their minds in space are quite chilling. For another, its third act goes down some weird territory that admirably swings for the fences. It doesn't hurt that this outlandish cosmic material is handled by 2 pro performers who couldn't sleepwalk through a role if they tried. Lawrence Fishburne is a great anchor for all the mayhem Event Horizon chronicles, while few actors are as fun to watch lose their minds as Sam Neill.
What happened to your eyes?
Where we're going, we won't need eyes to see.
Supporting performers like Kathleen Quinlan and Jason Isaacs also leave notable impressions in their screen time. In fact, a lot of the film's flaws come from external factors. Lots of Event Horizon's footage got cut at the last minute. But there's more to Event Horizon than either its initial reception or director's reputation would suggest, and it's a must-watch for sci-fi horror fans.
You having fun?
Hard Target was John Woo's first foray into American action filmmaking, and it did not get the best reviews upon its initial release. The dialogue and stilted storytelling especially drew criticism, along with the perception that Woo dialed things back for domestic audiences. No one would ever mistake Hard Target for being as good as Hard Boiled, but it's still a hell of a lot of fun. Watered down or not, it's full of Woo staples like motorcycle stunts, ultra slow-mo, and pigeons, sometimes all together. But don't forget about killer supporting turns from the likes of Lance Henriksen and Wilford Brimley, and all the horseback explosion escapes you could ask for. Hard Target also benefits from what you might call economic storytelling. The theatrical cut runs only 97 minutes, allowing the film to emphasize action sequences and snake slapping. We'll admit Hard Target is no masterpiece, even in the 90s action film genre, but it certainly deserved a better reputation than it initially got. With Armageddon, Michael Bay made a lot of movies at once. He not only created the 1990s biggest disaster movie in terms of scope, but he also crafted something that sporadically mimicked the epic romance of Titanic. To say the end result was not well liked by critics was an understatement. This undeniably disjointed tempo was blasted for its broadly sentimental impulses, as well as its truly terrible dialogue.
Captain America here blew the landing by 26 miles.
How the hell do you know that?
Because I'm a genius.
But one man's trash is another man's treasure. Armageddon was the nadir of 90s blockbuster movie excess. It's sheer mesmerizing idiocy. The dialogue from start to finish is filled with so many baffling lines played 100% straight that sometimes a movie is funnier than any straightforward comedy. Whether all that is unintentional or Michael Bay is a secret comedy genius is a debate that still goes on to this day.
This is our big problem in the Russian space station because I don't want to stay here.
Then there's the romance. You know, like the scene with AJ and Grace having an erotic moment with animal crackers a few days before Earth is going to explode. Soundtrack to the crooning vocals of Liv Tyler's dad, no less. Armageddon is full of elements like that, unsuccessful but nonetheless oddly compelling. Even the final stabs at pathos through self-sacrifice are oddly moving, despite the ham-fisted dialogue. Maybe Armageddon is as terrible as critics say, but it's also way more fun to watch than it should be. Most people have either never seen Double Team or have spent the last couple decades convincing themselves their memory of it was just a fever dream. Nothing about this should work, from the remote island subplot with Jean-Claude Van Damme, to all those monks and their tremendous computer skills, to Dennis Rodman's hair.
That hurt.
The whole thing is a jumbled collection of threadbare concepts for an action movie tossed into a blender, with a vending machine saving the day in the end. Double Team is pure madness that repelled almost all critics when it first came out. It's understandable. Still, there's undeniable fun to be had watching an action yarn so unabashedly unhinged, not to mention constantly throwing audacious new things at the audience. It's a feature that's basically the opposite of cohesion, but it's also way more fun than other technically more coherent action films, and Van Damme and Rodman's anti-chemistry is more amusing than you'd expect. Basically, Double Team is a mess, but you'll never be bored by it. Heck, the production even makes room to introduce a tiger into its climactic showdown between good and evil.
Yes! Behind you! Oh!
Is it bad? Yes. Is it still good? Definitely. Michael Patrick Jan's 1999 mockumentary Drop Dead Gorgeous chronicles a small-town beauty pageant that quickly turns deadly as contestants go to extreme lengths to win.
Nobody can stop me, but me.
Comedy is inherently subjective, but dark comedy, the way Drop Dead Gorgeous ran with it, is an especially slippery slope. In its initial release, the movie was largely greeted with a shrug from critics, with many stating that the feature lacked subtlety, while others lambasted Drop Dead Gorgeous as retreading ground well trodden by other dark comedies. Between these critiques and a middling box office run, the book seemed to close on Drop Dead Gorgeous right then and there. Over time, however, the movie's charms have endured. Appreciation has increased for its unique mockumentary format, while increasing cultural consciousness over how absurd beauty pageants can get has also made this project resonate with more viewers. A cast containing so many future movie stars surely hasn't stopped Drop Dead Gorgeous from securing new fans either. Black comedy isn't always a universally appealing element, but it proved a killer ingredient for Drop Dead Gorgeous. Mars Attacks is one of those movies where the critics are totally right. It has flaws, sure, but the difference is what a lot of people see as drawbacks are actually some of its greatest assets. Tim Burton's wacky take on an alien invasion movie is 100% a disjointed exercise guided by over-the-top comedic impulses as we watch various famous landmarks and movie stars bite the dust at the hands of otherworldly invaders. For some, that results in a tired exercise that feels like it's being made up as it goes along, but those qualities really just make Mars Attacks a welcome departure from so many other big-budget American blockbusters guided solely by rigid narrative conventions. Who needs traditional character arcs or third-act structures when you can watch Jack Nicholson get slaughtered by aliens twice? Even though its CG aliens haven't aged as well as the 1960s stop-motion effects they're supposed to evoke, many other Mars Attacks visual qualities are still impressive. Watching various lavish sets and miniatures deployed in a movie with the tone of a Bugs Bunny cartoon never gets old. Burton also wrings some genuinely bizarre imagery out of his tale, like a blossoming romance between Sarah Jessica Parker on a chihuahua body and Pierce Brosnan's severed head.
May I ask you a question?
Yes. Yes, of course you can, Natalie.
The critics were spot on. Mars Attacks is just several preposterous gags strung together, but that's why it's charming, especially compared to subsequent Burton movies. When Spike Lee's Summer of Sam hit theaters in July 1999, it wasn't just critics giving the film low marks. Audiences rejected it even more ferociously than critics, bestowing it with a dismal D- cinema score. That reputation has been impossible for Summer of Sam to shake as it's faded into obscurity in the decades since its release. That's a cinematic tragedy, since Lee's exploration of Bronx residents responding with anger and fear to events like serial killer Son of Sam's rampage and the New York City blackout of 1977 is haunting. Lee and his fellow screenwriters pull no punches in depicting where characters like Vinny point their rage, channeling their anger into all the wrong places and clinging to any kind of power in a world gone mad. Okay, to be fair, exploring these themes, Lee's tendency for outsized melodrama sometimes results in actors giving performances that lapse into unintentionally self-parody.
Friend to friend, I'm not gonna call the cops and just tell me, are you the son of Sam?
They think I'm the son of Sam, really? You think I'm the son of Sam?
Far more often though, Summer of Sam is a mesmerizing look at how hardship often inspires people to crush the marginalized rather than criticize the powerful. Plus, Lee's visual instincts are sharper than ever here, and it's a shame that Summer of Sam never received a better reception. Looking through Brendan Fraser's best movies, it's clear that this man excels at playing lovable fish-out-of-water characters trapped in worlds they don't understand. Whether it's Encino Man or George of the Jungle, Fraser's always nailed characters who inspire laughs but also make audiences care about the bigger emotional moments. Fraser inhabited the archetype once again in 1999's Blast from the Past, where he played Adam Weber, a man who lives in a fallout shelter for 35 years and emerges into a wholly new world. There, he meets Eve, a lady that Weber eventually becomes romantically enamored with. This classic setup for a comedy didn't inspire many critics to bust their funny bone back in 1999. Mixed responses to Blast from the Past noted that its general premise had been done to death in other comedies. But even with this initially chilly reception, there are countless reasons why fans say this 1999 rom-com still holds up today. For one thing, Fraser is deeply and admirably committed to a character other actors would have executed as a mocking caricature. His sincerity in portraying Adam Weber makes it easy to invest in his plight, while memorable supporting turns from Alicia Silverstone and Christopher Walken ensure Fraser's not the only one on screen delivering the goods. Blast from the Past doesn't reinvent the wheel, but it does provide a fun time that makes good use of Fraser's greatest acting gifts. The original The Exorcist should never have gotten a sequel. William Friedkin's 1973 film came together brilliantly through creative magic that's so far been impossible to recreate. But that's never stopped Hollywood from exploiting an easy dollar. So endless Exorcist sequels have littered movie theaters over the last 50 years. The only one that's remotely interesting is 1990's The Exorcist III, which saw William Peter Blatty, who wrote the original Exorcist novel and the book this movie is based on, stepping into the director's chair.
I've been waiting for you, Lieutenant. I wanted you to see this.
In this movie, characters like the protagonist, Lieutenant William Kinderman, inhabit a world full of misery. The dead linger in the minds of the living, while the living often crave the release of death. It's a stark status quo to establish following the ending of The Exorcist. Evil was technically vanquished here, but how could the film survivors just go on living after seeing what they saw? It's a solid launching point, and from there, a story making use of masterfully subtle scares unfolds. Striking imagery and chilling contemplations on life and death fill the runtime. The Exorcist III secured more unfavorable than favorable reviews upon its initial release, with many detractors harping on the undeniably clumsy climax, but it stood the test of time as far more than just an Exorcist rehash. Just Another Girl on the I.R.T. may have a weak Rotten Tomatoes score, but don't let that dissuade you from checking out Leslie Harris's 1992 directorial debut. The film follows Chantel Mitchell, a young girl who feels she's got her whole life planned out until an unexpected pregnancy throws her life into turmoil. Some criticism of I.R.T. centered on its tonal inconsistencies, but that's actually one of the key facets of the movie that actually makes it special. Harris really captures the complicated and erratic intricacies of growing up, a movie that starts with upbeat fourth-wall breaking dialogue and ends with a third act that's often downright harrowing is an effective cinematic echo of how growing up takes people to such unexpected and varied places. Back in the 90s, Just Another Girl on the I.R.T. was seen as just another coming-of-age indie movie. Now it's enjoyed as something far more special that deserves significantly more praise. A big criticism of 1998's Small Soldiers was that it was just a copy of Joe Dante's previous movies, namely Gremlins. It's true that the technologically advanced toys in Small Soldiers wreak havoc on suburbia, but Small Soldiers has some charms of its own, even if it never comes close to being as good as Gremlins.
All my makeup is cruelty-free.
For one thing, it's fun to see horror legend Dante inject some truly unnerving imagery into what's supposed to be a family-friendly blockbuster. A sequence where the commandos resurrect a bunch of Barbie-esque dolls to be their warriors with an imaginative concoction of plasma balls and blenders is just a thing nightmare fuel is made of. It's also a treat to see talented human actors like Kirsten Dunst play off these bloodthirsty toys, with Phil Hartman in his last live-action movie role especially delightful anytime he's on screen. The gravitas of Tommy Lee Jones as the voice of the commandos leader Chip Hazard also has way more mileage than it should, given the inherent silliness of the concept.
Soldier, your memory will live on.
Small Soldiers can't escape its obvious cinematic influences, but there are far worse things for Dante to parrot than his own classic movies. Taken on its own merits, it's a tonally erratic concoction with some fun thrills and an always welcome chance to bask in the comedic brilliance of Phil Hartman.
What are you doing? I don't know, Mario. Just trust me. I got a good feeling about this alleyway. I don't know. What?
To say 1993's Super Mario Bros. Has a toxic reputation is putting it mildly. As an adaptation, this project is an absolute train wreck that ignores most of the familiar stuff from the game in favor of rapping, apocalyptic production designs, and a heavy emphasis on fungus. The critical reception to Super Mario Bros. Absolutely reflects the general fan reception as well. Yet, over 30 years later, there's something charming about this unhinged would-be blockbuster. Today, theaters are crammed full of movies bending over backward to mimic what audiences liked from their childhood or older 1980s movies. Super Mario Bros. At least had the audacity to deliver visuals and concepts nobody previously associated with the Mario franchise. Actors like Bob Hoskins and Dennis Hopper fully throw themselves into this jumbled mess of a movie too, with the latter proving downright unforgettable. The production design and costumes are also a treat, even in the ways they're so clearly a product of early 1990s sensibilities. In the modern world, Mario fans now have a revenant feature film adaptation in the form of the Super Mario Bros. Movie. With that taken care of, maybe Super Mario Bros. And its bizarre imagination can get a little more credit, if only for being so subversive of expectations.
Goomba! Yeah. Walk tall! Be proud! Go Goomba!
1998 saw the release of two dueling summer blockbusters about apocalyptic asteroids heading for Earth. The real winner in this showdown turned out to be moviegoers everywhere, since both films had their own commendable artistic values. While one of those movies was Armageddon, the other was Deep Impact. The latter took a slower burn, melancholy approach to the planet's imminent demise, complete with lots of grand displays of emotion. This more intimate approach inspired mixed reviews in 1998, with several critics dismissing the proceedings as being too sappy and devoid of spectacle. While the CG-heavy moments in Deep Impact have aged poorly, its willingness to slow down and explore the human beings navigating the end of the world hasn't. Nowadays, Deep Impact is actually refreshing in a modern blockbuster landscape, populated with quips and rapid-fire mayhem. The presence of talented performers like Morgan Freeman and Robert Duvall lending some gravitas to conceptually implausible material doesn't hurt either. Deep Impact proved wildly different from 1998's other asteroid movie, ensuring it had plenty of distinctive virtues critics ignored back in the day. In the Mouth of Madness had its share of defenders from the very start, but this John Carpenter directorial effort was largely perceived by critics as a detrimentally excessive movie. Molded in the shadow of H.P. Lovecraft stories, the film was widely perceived as being too impenetrable to be truly scary. Plus, sequences relying heavily on atmosphere and unnerving imagery resulted in shrugs from many critics, who found these elements to lack the necessary scares. Since its release, however, Madness has gained a massive cult following. Those more abstract, esoteric qualities that alienated critics in 1994 are now seen as some of its best aspects.
Slimy things in the dark, people go mad, they turn into monsters, you know. But funny thing is that they're kind of better written than you expect, you know.
In the Mouth of Madness truly commits to being a cinematic manifestation of insanity, right down to its exciting willingness to let the inexplicable be just that. Insurance investigator John Trent's descent into madness is all about his grasp on reality becoming tenuous, with no easy explanations for his psychology and no tidy reasons for so much of the mayhem on screen. All that ambiguity may frustrate some moviegoers, but it's what makes Madness so chilling. Additionally, Carpenter and company proved creatively committed to the film's unique atmosphere, right down to an unhinged post-apocalyptic epilogue that totally defies mainstream cinema conventions. In the Mouth of Madness is many things, but it's certainly not as tedious as its initial critical reception suggested.
What about you, Captain Boyd? You don't eat meat?
Oh no, he won't.
Only as a last resort.
Among the many challenging roles in Guy Pearce's filmography is the lead in 1999's Ravenous, which offered him a period piece character he could really sink his teeth into. This snowy cannibal thriller isn't just something Yellow Jackets fans should watch pronto, it's also a movie that left critics cold in its initial theatrical release. Like many movies that attempt to merge the Western with other famous genres, this mixture of intense gory horror and Western motifs was seen as being more muddled than entertaining. The film's nuanced tone was also a source of contention for many critics, ditto the heavy emphasis on on-screen violence. While Ravenous will inevitably alienate some viewers with its graphic content and big tonal swings, it's also a beautiful-looking movie. The visuals alone make Ravenous worth a look. But there's also something compelling about its dedication to such a bleak story. The white male colonizers who normally occupy the role of unblemished heroes in many classic westerns are depicted here as violent figures, savoring flesh and power. There's a subversive underpinning Ravenous that's commendable, while its aggressive detours into so many different tones lets it offer up a little something for everyone. An ornery genre mashup, Ravenous is a period piece with bite and a great showcase for Pearce's talents. Paul Verhoeven's Showgirls didn't just get scathing reviews in its 1995 theatrical release, it became a pop culture punching bag, becoming synonymous with the very concept of the worst movies ever made. Elements like the extremely arch dialogue, ludicrous sex scenes, and over-the-top central performance from Elizabeth Berkley were mocked far and wide.
Back east. From where back east? Different places.
Looking back on these initial responses, it's clear that a lot of the early reactions sort of missed the point. Chiefly, this movie was a skewering of how misogyny is ingrained into capitalism and American society, not to mention how those entities pit women against each other. Berkley does everything in Showgirls, right down to eating fast food french fries with zero subtlety, because that's how real-life misogyny manifests too. Viewed through this lens, Showgirls suddenly coalesces into something more serious than it seems at first glance. The precise cinematography also makes for a fascinating contrast to this often more ridiculous material on screen. Verhoeven removes any titillation in sequences that would normally only exist for that purpose. All that's left is the raw preposterousness that defines so much exploitation in film. Showgirls isn't just better than its historically toxic reputation, it's an outright classic in many respects. Frankenhooker. Just that title alone is bound to make you sit up and take notice. Director and co-writer Frank Henenlotter's film sees a guy named Jeffrey Franken trying to bring his girlfriend, Elizabeth Shelley, back to life. The chaos that ensues received mixed and negative marks from critics, with many dismissing the project as just gross and shallow. Those responses aren't wrong, but they're also why Frankenhooker is so right.
If you weren't a guinea pig, I'd jump in that cage myself.
The movie combines a lot of gross-out practical effects with not-so-subtle digs at Reagan-era drug policies and a plot that eventually culminates in a moment that can only be described as good for her! It's so much low-budget lunacy brought to life with remarkable practical effects and palpable grimness that Frankenhooker proves irresistible. If the title alone understandably makes you recoil, it's best to skip this one.